The people burning down our country are protesters. They're engaged in a legitimate protest. He kneeled. Our leaders are kneeling before the mob. Almost all of our so-called conservative leaders joined the left's chorus, as if on cue. Kushner's assumption, apparently, is that African-American voters like looting.
Tucker Carlson has spent the past week dishing out dangerous drivel. And I hate to say that because I align with Carlson on a lot of economic issues, and he's one of the few people who really gets the bad things that are happening to the American middle class. But it's not as if the millions of white conservatives who watch his show every night needed any reinforcement of their delusions about racial issues in this country. But instead of enlightening those viewers, which Tucker Carlson's quite capable of doing, he's a very smart guy, he fed the myths and he fueled their anger.
Why are Americans surrendering?
The looting and wanton violence that erupted last weekend, the shooting of multiple law enforcement officers across the country is, of course, beyond reprehensible. Countless minority businesses in these neighborhoods were devastated by this savagery. And of course, Tucker's show was laden with video of these heinous acts. But he showed zero footage of law enforcement officers across the country brazenly and needlessly roughing up, and worse, peaceful protesters. And it's not as if that footage was difficult to find online.
Here's one of their protesters.
And throughout the week, Carlson cynically and fallaciously conflated peaceful protesters with looters and violent nihilists.
The president said we're with the peaceful protesters.
The peaceful protesters, O'Brien announced. Really, can you be more specific about that? Who are you talking about exactly?
He derided and lampooned white people, even conservative Republicans, who are awakening to our nation's unacceptable racial reality and trying to find common ground and solidarity with peaceful protesters pushing for needed changes.
No one has more contempt for Donald Trump's voters than Jared Kushner does.
What's wrong with white people doing that? Perhaps Carlson's low point was when he viciously ridiculed a 15-year-old girl who did a video showing that she was emotionally racked because her parents had no sense of outrage about the killing of George Floyd.
Just trying to tell me that, he deserved that because he did something wrong and that it was okay. That is not okay.
Yet the same man who taunted that girl held himself up as the avatar of protection for America's children. He sounded the alarm that our kids are being maliciously indoctrinated into racial sensitivity.
That's what your kids are learning right now. That's not an overstatement.
Tucker, I've got news for you. Excessive childhood education about the real racial problems in our country is not a crisis. The real crisis in education is that the vast majority of low-income African Americans attend schools that are shockingly substandard. And this is happening as middle-class homeowners across the country are being crushed by exploding property tax bills to pay for those awful schools.
Someone in America needed to tell the truth to the country.
The United States doesn't operate as if Black lives matter, certainly as much as white lives. And anyone who says otherwise is either lying or clueless.
America's going to change because of this, that is certain. What can we learn from it? What should we demand going forward? The first thing to know is that we can no longer accept race baiting from our leaders.
According to recent polls, the overwhelming majority of white people in America believe that our country has got to do a lot more to heal the racial divide. And over 60% of those white people believe that the criminal justice system is biased against African Americans. And that was before the George Floyd murder.
The skin color of criminals is totally irrelevant to how we prosecute them for the crimes they commit.
Carlson disingenuously extolled the colorblindness of the criminal justice system. The truth is that system is a disaster for low-income African Americans. African Americans are more likely to be subjected by police to force, even if that force is very rarely deadly force. Fear of and lack of trust in the police among African Americans in the inner city means that they don't tend to cooperate with police on criminal investigations. And that's a big reason why we have an appallingly high level of unsolved murders in our big cities. The vast majority of low-income African Americans, if they're arrested, are forced to rely on overwhelmed and underpaid public defenders. And that poor legal representation means that they are often incarcerated, which costs a lot of money, for crimes that people with better representation would not be. That's both expensive and it also impairs them in terms of their careers for life, and that's not good for anybody. Beyond protesting our criminal justice system's injustices when it comes to African Americans, black people are rightly protesting that they continue to be severely impaired by centuries of diabolically designed racist structures in our society and carefully cultivated negative black stereotypes.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight.
By Friday, Carlson was frantically alerting his viewers that white people who are aligning themselves with the goals of the peaceful protesters are being lured into a cult.
But more than that, they give up control of their minds.
If so, count me in.
Keep in mind, as this insanity continues, that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every action provokes a reaction. That's physics. We don't know where this is going. We don't want to know where it's going. The cult members should stop now, immediately, before more innocents get hurt, and they will if they don't.
After an entire week of shows where he emanated inflammatory claptrap, after lamenting that we may not be able to bring our society back together, Tucker Carlson didn't lay out a single plan or even describe an idea to bridge our yawning racial gap, to overcome the dreadful disparities between our white and black citizens. Well, as a matter of fact, I have outlined some solutions on my YouTube channel, and I'd love to go on Tucker's show to discuss them.